Hi, and welcome to The Dreaming Scientist, a quiet place in deep space with softly spoken science for sleepy minds. Tonight we follow a calm trail from a hot young Earth to the first tiny steps of life. We will see how simple stuff like water, rock and air gave rise to little bubbles, helpful molecules, and finally cells that could copy themselves. Settle in, get comfortable, and let the story unfold. But before you do that, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below where you are watching from. It is always intriguing to know who is watching us from around the world, and thank you so much for being here. Now, picture Earth more than 4 billion years ago, not as the calm blue globe we know, but as a hot and restless world. The surface was covered by wide fields of dark lava that slowly cooled in the night and warmed again in the day. Space rocks still fell now and then, and each one brought a burst of heat that melted ground and tossed dust into the sky. The air was thick with water vapor from countless volcanic vents. Carbon dioxide and nitrogen were there too, along with small amounts of other gases from deep rock. There was almost no oxygen. The young sun was dimmer than today, yet the heavy blanket of gases kept heat close to the ground. As the planet lost its early heat to space, steam in the air condensed into clouds. Then came rain, not a short storm, but a patient fall over a very long time. Raindrops hissed where they met warm rock and rushed along brand new slopes. Water filled shallow basins, spilled over their edges, carved channels, and found lower places still. Little by little, puddles became lakes. Lakes linked and became seas, and the seas joined to form the first wide oceans. The new water dissolved salts from fresh rocks and carried them to the sea, so the oceans became briny. Lightning flashed in the thick air, and sunlight pushed through when clouds broke, giving steady energy to any chemical mix near the surface. On the ocean floor, where new crust formed and where magma rested close below, hot water rose through cracks. These were hydrothermal vents. Some vents shot dark fluids rich in metals and sulfur into the cold deep. Others made lighter plumes of warm water full of hydrogen and minerals. On land, the rim of every fresh flow had shallow pools that filled in the rain and then dried in the sun. Tides along young shores soaked flat sands and left them to dry again. Thin films of water crept over warm rocks during the day and pulled back at night. All these places acted as quiet little labs. They brought together water, rock and gas and gently stirred them with heat and light. No cells yet, no genes, only simple molecules meeting each other again and again, making and breaking bonds, always nudged by heat, light, and the push and pull of wet and dry. The planet did not set out to make life. It simply followed the rules of chemistry in a million small corners at once. But those corners mattered. They kept parts moving. They made fresh supplies. They gave time and space for rare steps to happen and then to happen again. From this steady background, the first long path toward living things began, not with a blaze, but with countless small reactions on a slowly cooling world. Every living thing is built from a short list of parts. Water is the main medium because it lets other molecules move and meet. Carbon makes chains and rings that can hold energy and shape. Hydrogen and oxygen make water and also take part in many bonds. Nitrogen helps build the letters used in genetic chains and the pieces used to make proteins. Phosphorus stores energy in handy packets and links the backbone of genetic strands. Sulfur helps many proteins fold into useful shapes. A few metals like iron, magnesium, zinc, and copper help reactions along by carrying small charges. Early Earth held all of these in the right forms. Volcanoes sent out steam, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and small amounts of other gases. The oceans dissolved minerals from hot new crust and carried them far. The air and the sea were stirred by winds and tides. Lightning and sunlight added energy every day. Heat from the ground added energy from below. Even space helped. Some of the rocks that fell from space carried simple molecules like small acids and oily chains and tiny rings made in cold clouds between the stars. When such a rock warmed and met water, it released those parts into the mix. If you set water, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and a few simple gases in a wet place on warm ground and give them light or an electric spark, they make small building blocks. In many labs, people see this happen. The exact mix depends on what is in the jar, but common results appear again and again. You get amino acids, which are small parts that can join into longer chains called peptides and proteins. You get fatty acids, which are oily chains that gather into skins in water. You get simple sugars, which are small rings that can join to make larger chains. You get small energy carriers that can store a little energy and share it during a reaction. None of these is alive. They float and drift and break apart and form again. Yet they matter because living cells use the same kinds of parts. Picture a tide pool after a hot day. Water has slowly left the shallow edge and left a thin film on warm rock. In that film, small molecules crowd together because the water is mostly gone. Crowding helps reactions along. When the pool fills again with the next tide or a rain shower, the film becomes water once more, and whatever was formed in the dry step is now free to move. It can meet new partners and react again. Along a shore where this happens twice a day, or on a lava shelf where this happens each sunny afternoon, the cycle repeats without pause for years. Under the sea, a different kind of place does the same job. Around vents, hot fluids meet cold seawater and form tiny layers inside rock pores. Chemicals ride across those layers and react in protected spaces. There is no plan in this, only chance supported by steady energy. But chance at 1,000,000 sites for 1,000,000 years is no longer chance in the way we use the word in daily life. It is patient search. It is a slow sift that tries every simple path and keeps the ones that make new parts faster than they break. Loose parts cannot do much unless they link into longer chains that hold energy and shape. On a wet planet that may sound hard because water can also break chains apart. The secret is rhythm and surface. Think again of a sun-warmed pool that dries at the edge each afternoon. As water leaves, small molecules crowd in the thin film that clings to the rock. Two amino acids that would rarely meet in a deep soup now sit side by side. Heat wiggles them. A bond forms, and a tiny bit of water leaves as the two join. The next day, the same film dries again, and more bonds form. Soon there is a short chain of amino acids called a peptide. With more cycles, that chain can grow. If a few chains fold into stable shapes that resist breaking, they last long enough to take part in the next round. Sugars can link this way too. In a different corner of the same pool, small ring molecules line up and join into longer threads. Minerals make this easier. Some clays have tiny sheets with charged edges that grab small molecules out of water and hold them close. The surface acts like a crowded table where matches are more likely. Iron and sulfur minerals near warm springs can pass tiny charges from one part of a reaction to another. That lowers the amount of heat needed and lets reactions run at modest temperatures. A helper that speeds a reaction without being used up is called a catalyst. Rock made the first catalysts long before cells made protein tools to do the same work. Waves play a part too. Where foam forms and breaks, thin films spread and draw oily parts to the surface. When wind pushes those films across rough rock, you get the same drying and crowding that a pool edge gives. In all these places, the planet does work for free. Sunlight drives evaporation, gravity pulls water back, tides keep time, and rock offers surfaces. Most chains break apart. A few last. Some of the ones that last begin to act as weak tools. A folded peptide might hold a small metal ion and then help link two other small molecules. A short sugar chain might stick to a rock surface in a way that lines other molecules up for a bond. None of these early tools is sharp or fast by modern cell standards. They do not need to be. They just need to tilt the odds in favor of making more chains before the next wave or the next night. Over long time, with many cycles, the best tools become more common. They are more common simply because they help make parts that help make more of themselves. This is selection in chemistry. It does not think, it does not aim. It just keeps what works a little and lets what fails fall away. In this quiet way, the first steps toward true copying and true metabolism grew from thin films on warm rocks, from small pores in hot stones, and from gentle rhythms that never stopped. If you mix simple oily molecules with water and then swirl, they gather into tiny bubbles on their own. The water-loving ends face outward. The water-shy ends hide inside. The thin skin they make is a membrane. Early Earth had many places where such skins could form without help. Along warm shores, thin films of oily stuff spread over wet rocks, then curled and sealed into small spheres when a breeze wrinkled the film or when a wave pulled back. In tide pools, a hot sunny hour dried the rim, then a splash sent off a spray of bubbles. Near warm springs, rising fluids shook and rolled tiny droplets that wrapped themselves in skins. Each bubble trapped a small sample of whatever the water held at that moment. Some bubbles held only salt and simple parts. A few, just by chance, trapped short chains that had formed earlier on a dry patch of rock, plus a handful of small fuels, plus a pinch of metals from a nearby vent. Most bubbles fell apart in minutes. Some lasted longer. Here is why that mattered. A bubble keeps its insides near itself. Long chains do not drift away. Fuel that slips in from outside cannot wash the inside clean with each tide. The bubble is a tiny room, and rooms let work add up. Growth is simple. If a bubble sits in water that holds free oily chains, those chains slip into the skin and make it larger. If the inside holds chains that turn small pieces into new oils, growth is faster. Division is simple too. A big bubble is not stable. A push from a ripple or a pinch at a rock edge makes the skin neck and split into two. Each daughter inherits a random share of the inside. If the mother held helpful chains, a few daughters will too. Those daughters will grow and split more often, so over many cycles they become more common than bubbles that hold nothing useful. This is selection without genes. It is based on what works now, not on a plan. Small pores can appear in the skin as well. Short peptides, only a few dozen units long, can fold into tiny tubes. A tube lets water in and out more smoothly. Some tubes let simple fuels pass and keep large chains inside. Other short chains sit at the neck when a bubble stretches and make splitting easier. With these small helps, a simple protocell can do three quiet things. It can keep safe what it already has. It can take in fresh feed from outside. It can grow and divide when large. If storms carry such rooms from one pool to another, they seed new places with toolkits that work. The line between a simple bubble and a very simple living cell is crossed when what is inside can copy its keychains well enough to keep its traits through many rounds of growth and splitting. Before that line, the pool gives the parts. After that line, the protocell makes many of its own parts. The change is not sudden. It is a slow shift where more and more of the needed parts are made inside rather than found by luck outside. The planet did not design this. It supplied heat, water, and surfaces. Bubbles did the rest by simple physics and by small chains that helped in tiny ways, repeated over and over across deep time. Today, cells keep plans in DNA, use RNA to carry and read those plans, and use proteins to do most work. At the start, a simpler setup may have grown first. In this idea, a chain called RNA did two jobs at once. It carried short scripts that could be copied. It also folded into shapes that helped reactions along. Such helpful RNAs are called ribozymes. The words sound big, but the idea is plain. One kind of chain could both hold a message and act like a small tool. Could such chains form on early Earth? In warm, shallow pools that dried each day, the small parts of RNA can link on clay because the clay lines them up. Once a short strand exists, other short strands can sit next to it by matching letters along the chain. When a partner sits in place, it is easier for a new chain to form. The first copies were messy. They had errors. They often stopped early. But a rough copy is still a start, and errors can be trimmed by cycles that break weak bonds and keep strong ones. If some strands fold into shapes that help make more of their own letters from simple feed, those shapes will become more common because they help to make more of themselves. If some strands make tiny parts of the membrane, the bubble that holds them will grow and divide more often, and those strands will spread. If some strands help turn a small fuel into a bigger fuel that stores energy for later, the bubble stays active even when the pool is less rich. Step by step, a loose set of reactions can form in which strands help make strands, strands help make skins, and skins protect strands. This is the seed of heredity and the seed of metabolism, two core features of life. The mix did not need to be pure. Strands, short peptides, oily parts, and small metals could all work together. In fact, they likely had to, because each filled a gap the others could not. A short RNA might hold a metal that moves tiny charges. A short peptide might make a little pore. A small oily acid might thicken the skin. Together they make a steadier room. At some point, a key tool appears, an RNA that can join amino acids into longer peptides in a set order guided by a matching script. The heart of this tool is still found in every cell today. It is called the ribosome. The core of the ribosome is RNA, not protein, which hints at its ancient roots. Once longer proteins appear, more shapes and more speed are possible. Proteins can fold into pockets that hold small molecules and speed hard steps. They can also brace and fix strands so copies break less often. But RNA still matters. It can copy parts of itself, and it can guide the making of protein. For a long time, the two likely worked side by side in small, simple rooms near warm shores and vents. Not fast, but steady enough to grow and to pass on a set of traits from one round to the next. Nothing happens without energy. Modern cells move energy in small packets that can be spent and then refilled. Long before those packets were common, simple fuels and natural gradients did the job. A natural gradient is a difference between inside and outside. Think of salty water outside and fresher water inside. Think of acid outside and less acid inside. If there is a path for tiny charges to cross the skin, that flow can power a step. Early Earth supplied many such differences. Near seafloor vents, hot alkaline fluids rich in hydrogen met cold, more acidic seawater. The rocks there have thin walls with tiny holes. Across those walls, charges could move in a steady flow. Inside the tiny holes, simple groups of atoms on iron and sulfur surfaces could pass electrons along in small steps and make new bonds. In shallow pools, day and night made a heat gradient. Rain and sun made a fresh and salty gradient. Ice edges made briny veins in winter and then fresh melt in spring. Protocells that could catch a bit of this flow and spend it to link parts into longer chains had an edge. What does it mean to catch and spend energy? Think of a small carrier molecule that holds a bit of energy in a bond and then gives it up when a chain needs help to form. Think of a tiny gate in the skin that opens when acid is high outside and lets a charge rush in, and the rush turns a wheel like a child's toy that pushes two small parts together. Later, cells made real wheels that spin to make their main energy packet. But at the start, even a simple switch that let charges through only when outside conditions were right could drive a simple step. There is also a very old set of reactions that can fix carbon from the air into small acids using only hydrogen as a fuel and simple metals as helpers. In modern cells, some deep lineages still use a polished version of this path to live in places with no sunlight. Long ago, a rougher, rock-based version may have run in tiny pores in natural vents. Protocells that sat on or near such pores could borrow the products and slowly internalize the steps, first by sticking to the rock, then by holding a small metal in a pocket, then by building a crude tool that did the same step inside their own room. Over time, energy handling moves inward. Small carriers spread. A few steps string together so that each makes the feed for the next. This is the root of metabolism, a web of linked steps that keeps a cell going. It did not appear in a rush. It grew like a footpath that becomes a road. First a track, then a better track, then a packed way that holds through storms. At first, there were many bubbles and only a few had working sets of parts. Most fell apart or drifted empty across a tide pool and burst at the shore. But in every pool and along every warm spring, there were cycles that sorted rooms by how well they held together and by what they could do. A room that kept its inside stable when the pool grew salty at noon lasted longer. A room that let in small fuels but kept large chains safe grew faster. A room that made small bits of its own skin from feed in the water saved time and split sooner. Simple traits like these do not sound like life, yet they make more of the same rooms each day. The key is that rooms that work a little soon outnumber rooms that do not. They eat the same feed and they use it better. When the pool is rich, both kinds grow. When the pool is poor, only the better rooms survive. In this way, the average room in a place can gain more and more helpful sets without any plan. At some point, the main chains inside begin to copy with enough faithfulness that traits are no longer lost each round. Copies are still rough. Errors still happen. But on average, daughters look like mothers and carry the same basic set of tools. Now selection grows stronger because a set that helps now is more likely to be present later too. A short strand that helps make a small carrier molecule will be passed on with the small carrier. A tiny pore that opens when the outside is acidic will pass on its trait and let the next room use the same gradient. A short peptide that binds a bit of iron and helps move a small charge will help make more of itself by helping make the fuel it needs. These are feedbacks, but they are quiet and local. They do not need foresight. They only need the simple rule that rooms with working sets grow and split more often. Over many cycles, protocells begin to rely less on lucky parts from outside and more on parts they can make inside. A pool that once fed bubbles now holds bubbles that feed themselves. When storms carry such rooms down a stream, or when a wave pushes them into a new lagoon, they bring their toolkits with them. Many will still fail. A few will find a niche where their set works even better. And when different lines meet, sometimes they fuse. If two rooms touch and their skins merge, their insides mix. If both carried helpful sets that did not clash, the new mix may work better than either alone. A room that had a solid skin may gain a better energy tool. A room that had a good energy tool may gain a better copy tool. Fusion and sharing are part of the quiet story, just as much as copying and splitting. By this stage, we have protocells that hold a simple script, use a few simple fuels, keep a stable inside, and pass on traits through many rounds. They are still small and slow. They still rely on the steady cycles of their home, but they have become tough enough to last, to spread, and to take the next steps toward the complex machines we see in life today. RNA can act as both message and tool, but it is fragile. Proteins can act as strong tools, but they need a script to place each small unit in the right order. DNA is a better library than RNA because it is more stable in water and because two strands hold each other in shape and allow repair. A simple path forward is clear. The plan moves from RNA to DNA. The tools move from RNA to protein. RNA remains as the reader and the go-between. How could this shift happen? In small rooms where RNA already linked short amino acids into short peptides, a slow upgrade could begin. Strands that bound small helpers called cofactors could aid a step that put a new unit onto a growing peptide. Strands that held metal ions could help join the sugar and base parts needed for DNA. At first, DNA strands may have been short and only held a few key messages that had to last between dry spells or hot bursts. Over time, more messages moved into DNA because it kept them safer. The act of reading a script and building a tool settled into a shared set of rules. This shared set is the genetic code. It maps triplets of letters to small amino units. In modern life, the code is nearly the same in all cells, which hints that it was fixed very early and then passed down. Why those mappings? Simple reasons help. Some amino units were more common in the early mix. Some fit better in simple active pockets. Some pairings reduce harm when errors happen, because similar letters map to similar units. In rooms that made more tools, any code that made harmful mix-ups less likely spread. The most striking clue to this history sits at the heart of the tool that reads scripts. The ribosome is the machine that links amino units into a long chain. Its core is RNA, not protein. The protein parts brace it and tune it, but the heart is an old RNA that still does the key step. This suggests that reading and building began in an RNA-rich world and then took on protein parts as those parts became available. As proteins took over most work, rooms gained speed and range. A protein can fold into deep pockets that hold small molecules in just the right pose for a step. It can flex and wiggle in ways RNA cannot. With protein tools, rooms could build better pores, stronger skins, and more faithful copy tools. With DNA libraries, rooms could keep longer scripts and hold backups. With both in place, life could grow in more places, meet changes with more options, and begin the long path towards cells with walls, tails, and senses. None of this erased the old parts. RNA still carries messages. DNA still needs RNA to be read. Proteins still serve in the ribosome, but the core remains RNA. The three parts still work together in every cell, a living memory of how the first rooms moved from chance chemistry to steady heredity and busy tool shops that could build more of themselves from simple feed. A bubble with a thin, oily skin is a start, but a true cell needs a skin that does more than just hold things in. It must be tough enough to face salt, heat, and waves. It must let small fuels in without losing the long chains that do the work. It must also learn to use differences between inside and outside to power steps. Early skins improved by mixing different oily chains. Short chains added bend, longer chains added strength. Small head groups with a soft charge helped the skin face salt without falling apart. As skins got better, short peptides began to sit inside them and act like tiny gates. A gate is a narrow passage that opens for the right kind of small piece, like a sugar or a simple ion, and stays shut for large chains. Some gates opened when the outside was more acidic than the inside. Some opened when the inside was too full of one kind of ion and needed to let it out. These small moves turned a loose sac into a living border that helped the room keep its balance and take in feed. Energy came from differences. If the outside held more tiny positive charges than the inside, and if the skin had a path that let those charges slip through, the flow could push a small tool to do work. Later, this tool became a spinning machine that makes the main energy packet used by nearly all cells today. At the start, it was likely much simpler, a wedge that clicked forward when a charge passed and pushed two small parts together into a larger one. This larger one held a bit of stored energy that other steps could spend. Near seafloor vents, natural differences flowed all the time between warm alkaline fluid and colder, more acidic seawater. Early rooms that clung to mineral walls could borrow that flow. In shallow pools, day and night, and fresh and salty cycles made swings that rooms learned to tap with simple gates. The gain was huge. With steady small packets of energy, a room did not have to wait for rare hot moments to make long chains. It could join parts at a gentle pace without boiling the soup and breaking what it had already made. With energy packets, rooms could also power little pumps that moved ions out or in to keep the inside steady when the outside changed. This is called homeostasis, which means holding a stable inner state. It is the quiet gift that lets chemistry continue even when the world outside swings between dry and wet, hot and cool, fresh and salty. As skins, gates, pumps, and simple energy packets came together, protocells crossed another line. They were no longer only passengers in pools and vents. They had a small engine of their own. They could choose in a simple way, by opening a gate here and closing one there, by saving packets when feed was rich and spending them when it was poor. These were not thoughts. They were rules in molecules, but they were enough to keep the same kind of room alive through many rounds of growth and split. From a simple bubble that broke at the first wave, we now have a small factory that keeps itself going. When we look at all life today, from tiny bacteria to trees to people, we find the same deep tools. All use DNA as the library for long-term plans. All use RNA to read those plans and to help build the tools. All use a ribosome to link small amino units into proteins, and the heart of that ribosome is made of RNA. All use nearly the same code that maps 3 letters in a script to a single amino unit in a tool. All use small energy packets that carry a bit of power from place to place. All keep a difference in charges across a skin and use that difference to make those packets. This shared set points back to a time when one line of cells had gathered these tricks and then gave rise to all later lines. Scientists call that cell line the common ancestor of all life. It was not the first living thing, and it was not a single cell on a single day. It was a population of tiny cells that traded parts and scripts, lived in similar places, and shared a core toolkit. What might those cells have been like? Their skins were likely made of simple oily chains that could hold in water yet let small fuels pass with the help of gates. Inside, they kept DNA to hold messages, RNA to read them, and proteins to do most tasks. They had a ribosome to build proteins. They had simple pumps and tiny wheels to use, charge differences to make energy packets. They likely used carbon dioxide from the air or water, and hydrogen or small sulfur compounds as fuel, because those were common in their homes. Many lived near warm rocks where minerals could help reactions. Others lived in shallow pools and learned to hunt for sunlit feed washed in from drying edges. They did not breathe oxygen. The sky had almost none. They did not eat complex sugars or fats made by other life. There was not yet a food web. They made their own parts from small, simple feed and a tight loop of reactions now called core metabolism. They copied their DNA by simple tools and split in two when large, passing on their scripts and tools to each daughter. Errors happened, but repair tools already existed in simple form because heat and light could damage scripts, and any line that could not fix itself would fade. These cells also swapped parts. When one broke open, a neighbor could take in useful chains. When two touched, their skins could merge and mix. When a tiny virus-like particle carried a piece of script from one to another, a new mix could appear. Swapping helped good ideas spread among cousins, so a new gate or a better copy tool did not stay trapped in one line. This mix and match is still common in tiny cells today. It makes the early tree of life look more like a net. The important point is simple. Long before plants and animals, long before oxygen, long before shells and bones, the deep rules of life were already set. They were set by small cells that learned to write and read scripts, to use proteins as tools, to make and spend energy packets, and to keep a steady inside in a jumpy world. We were not there to watch the first cells, but the rocks were. Old stones hold quiet signs that, taken together, tell a steady story. In some of the oldest crust that still survives, more than 3.5 billion years old, we find wavy layered mounds made of thin sheets of fine grains glued together. These are stromatolites. Today, such mounds grow where thin films of tiny cells trap sand and silt in shallow water and glue the grains with slimy coats. The old mounds look much the same. Their layers are even, they drape over little ripples. They branch and heal like living mats do. In other places, very thin slices of ancient rock show tiny shapes that look like cells. These claims are tricky and often argued because heat and pressure can twist rocks and make odd patterns. So the strongest signs come from chemistry. Life likes the light version of carbon. In atoms, light and heavy forms differ by the number of neutrons, which are small parts of the nucleus. When living cells pull in carbon dioxide and fix it into their parts, they prefer the light form. Over time, this leaves a mark in the ratio of light to heavy carbon. In some of the oldest rocks, the carbon in old minerals shows this bias toward light carbon, which hints that life was working when those minerals formed. In deep sea rocks that were once hot springs, we see minerals shaped by ancient vent fluids, and we also see traces of sulfur and iron chemistry that match what tiny cells do today near vents, using sulfur and iron to move small charges and gain energy without sunlight. Around 3.5 billion years ago, we see wide, calm, shallow seas with many stromatolite reefs, which suggests mats of tiny cells were common on warm shelves. Later, we also find thin black shales rich in organic carbon that settled in quiet basins, a sign that lots of small cells lived and died and drifted to the bottom. As time moves on, we see more oxygen in some minerals, which tells us light-using cells began to change the sky. We should be careful because signs can mislead. Heat can move atoms and blur old ratios. Flows can make odd shapes that mimic cells. But when many lines of evidence point the same way, we can be confident. The picture that emerges is calm and strong. Life began early, found many homes, and changed the surface and the sea long before any creature with a shell or a spine ever lived. The first steps were taken in water and on rock under a dim sun, with no air to breathe and no food except what cells made for themselves from simple feed. And yet, over time, those quiet films and mats piled up, built reefs, left carbon in muds, and set the stage for everything that followed. Long before plants, some tiny cells learned to use light to move small charges and make fuel. At first, this did not make oxygen. These early light users borrowed electrons from simple sources like iron or hydrogen sulfide, which is a smelly gas from vents and rotting mud. They used the light to push electrons uphill in energy and then let them flow back down through their tools to make the small packets that power steps and to fix carbon into new parts. Ponds with iron gave a rusty feed. Shallows with sulfur gave a stinky feed. In both, light drove the work. This is often called anoxygenic photosynthesis, which just means light use without making oxygen. It was a big step because sunlight is a wide, steady source. Cells that used it did not need to sit only at vents or wait for rare feeds. Much later, a bold change happened. A line of tiny cells found a way to pull electrons from water. This is very hard because water holds its electrons tightly. The tool that did it is a set of proteins and special pigments that together can grab a photon of light and use its punch to split water into protons, electrons, and oxygen. The protons help make the main energy packets. The electrons run through a chain of tools to build sugar and other parts. The oxygen is left over and drifts away as a gas. The cells that do this are called cyanobacteria. They look simple, but their light tools are very advanced. Once they spread in shallow seas, oxygen began to build in surface waters and then in the sky. At first, the oxygen met iron in the water and rusted it, which made vast red bands in old rocks that we still see in cliffs today. When the iron was used up, oxygen began to leak into the air. This was not a slow, gentle rise at the start. It was a rough path with long steps and back steps because oxygen reacts with many things. It rusted rocks. It burned methane in the air, which is a strong warming gas, and that likely cooled the planet at times. It also made a new shield high in the sky called ozone, which blocks harsh ultraviolet light and lets life live closer to the surface without as much damage. For many tiny cells, oxygen was a poison. They had grown in a world without it, and their tools were not made to handle it. They hid in muds and deep waters where oxygen could not reach. Others learned to use oxygen as a strong acceptor of electrons to gain far more energy from the same food, which is the start of breathing as we know it. The first light steps were soft and local. The later step to splitting water was a world changer. It filled the sky with a reactive gas, made the sea rust, and opened the door to more complex cells that could afford the energy cost to build larger, richer sets of tools. All of this began with tiny membranes, simple gates, and small packets of energy, and grew into machines that could pull power from a photon and write it into sugars, one quiet sunrise at a time. Once tiny light users began to pull electrons from water, oxygen leaked into shallow seas and then into the air. At first, the new gas did not build up because it met hungry sinks. It met iron in the water and rusted it into red minerals that sank in layers to the sea floor. These layers formed wide red bands we now see in ancient cliffs. It met volcanic gases that could be burned, and it met rocks that had never felt oxygen before. For a long time, the new gas was soaked up as fast as it formed. But the light workers kept going, sunrise after sunrise, in calm lagoons and open shelves. The sinks slowly filled. Iron in the sea grew scarce. Reactive parts in near-surface rocks got used up. At some point, the balance tipped. Oxygen started to remain in the water and then in the air. This slow tipping is called the Great Oxidation, and it changed almost everything. Methane in the air, which traps heat very well, was burned away by the rising oxygen. Without as much methane, the planet likely cooled, and ice may have spread far at times. Sunlight at the ground changed too. Before, a haze made by methane and sunlight may have filtered and warmed the air. As oxygen rose and methane fell, the haze thinned. High above, some of the oxygen turned into a shield gas called ozone. Ozone blocks harsh ultraviolet light, which allowed life to creep closer to the surface of water and to the edges of ponds without as much damage from the sun. For many tiny cells that had grown in a world without oxygen, the new gas was poison. It broke their tools. They retreated into mud, into deeper water, and into wet cracks where the gas could not reach. Other cells learned to live with it by making small guards that mop up the most reactive forms. A few learned to use oxygen to burn food in a careful way that gives a lot of energy with each bite. This careful burn is the start of breathing as we know it. The world now held two broad kinds of places. There were oxygen-poor places, where old ways went on using iron, sulfur, or hydrogen to move small charges and make food from simple feed. There were oxygen-rich places, where new ways grew that used the strong pull of oxygen to squeeze much more energy from the same food. This split let life spread into many niches. It also set a path toward larger cells, because the new burn gives enough energy to pay for bigger, richer toolkits. None of this happened in a single leap. Local oxygen oases came and went long before the global shift. The global change likely took many tens of millions of years, with steps forward and back. Yet in the rock record, the mark is clear. Red iron layers become rare. Minerals that cannot live with oxygen vanish from shallow deposits. Sulfur in old sediments shows new patterns that fit a sky that holds free oxygen. The air had learned a new trick. It could rust. From then on, the ground, the sea, and the sky would be shaped by that quiet breath day after day. Using oxygen well is hard. It is a strong taker of electrons. If you let it react at random, it tears tools apart. To use it well, cells had to build a safe path that moves electrons step by step through tiny seats in proteins set in a skin. Each step drops a little energy. That energy is used to pump tiny charges across the skin, so the inside and outside hold a difference. Then a small wheel at the skin lets charges flow back in and uses that flow to make the main energy packet used by almost all life today. That packet can then be spent to build bonds, to drive pumps, or to pull food into shape. Building this path from scratch is very hard. A cleaner route was a merger. Long ago, a large simple cell swallowed a smaller cell that could already handle oxygen well. Instead of digesting it, the large cell kept it. The small guest kept making energy packets, and the host fed it. Over time, the partners tied their lives together. Most of the guest's genes moved into the host's library, but a few that run the energy path stayed with the guest. The guest lost many outside tools and learned to live only inside the host. Today we call this guest the mitochondrion. Each sits behind a double skin, which hints at its past as a free cell. It still has a tiny loop of its own script. It still makes the key parts of the path that moves electrons and pumps charges. The host provides most other parts, sends them in, and sets the pace. This union lets cells tap oxygen's power safely and richly. With a steady flow of energy packets, cells could afford to grow larger, keep more backups, repair better, and run many jobs at once. They could hold a set of inner rooms to sort tasks and keep dangerous steps away from fragile scripts. They could build a flexible inner frame to change shape, to feed by engulfing food, and to crawl. Cells with mitochondria could also live in more places, because they were not tied to vents, iron-rich ponds, or dim, shallow seas. They could feed on other cells, and not only on small feed, which opened a new web of roles. The merger did not happen often. It was rare and deep, and once done it set the base for a whole branch of life. In this branch sit animals, plants, fungi, and many tiny cousins. Every one of them carries the mark of that old deal. Little energy makers that hum day and night, a shared code to read scripts, a way to keep charges across a skin, and the gift of large energy budgets that make complex bodies possible. The lesson is gentle. Life did not only compete, it also fused and kept what worked, even when it meant living inside another cell forever. With a rich energy flow, some cells began to reorganize inside. They drew a skin around their main script to keep it safe from busy chemistry in the rest of the room. This made a nucleus, which is a safe file room. They folded their outer skin inward to make a maze of inner sheets and tubes. This maze is a workshop where parts are made, folded, checked, and shipped. It also holds acid sacs that break down worn tools and recycle pieces. They grew a flexible scaffold made of long fibers that can grow, shrink, and slide. The scaffold gives shape, moves parcels, and helps the cell divide. Small motors walk along the fibers carrying loads. Others pull on fibers to change the whole shape, to reach, to pinch, or to crawl. With a scaffold, a cell can eat by wrapping its skin around food and pulling it inside. With a maze of inner rooms, it can run harsh steps in one place and keep gentle steps safe in another. Careful traffic rules arose. Parcels wear tiny tags that tell where they should go. Gates open and close in the right place at the right time. The whole is like a city inside a drop of water. This new plan had costs. Scripts had to be copied and packed for shipment across the nuclear border. Proteins had to be tagged and folded right. Traffic had to be timed. But the gains were large. Damage to the main script dropped, which allowed longer messages and more tools. New tool mixes could be tested in one inner room without wrecking the whole. Predators could be built because shape could change fast and because food could be packaged and digested. Partnerships with other cells could be deeper because cells could hold each other without mixing their inner parts. Along with these changes came better ways to clean scripts of errors, to cut and paste parts of messages, and to shut genes on and off with fine control. Cells began to tell time with inner clocks that tracked day and night. They built sensors for light, touch, heat, and chemicals. Every step still followed simple rules, but the number of steps grew, and so did the range of roles a single cell could play. Many of these complex cells stayed single and filled ponds, soils, and seas with new forms. Others gathered in films and rough colonies that gained simple teamwork. The path from a single builder to a team of builders was now open because energy was abundant, tools were varied, and inner order could be kept while parts talked to each other at the edge. Copying a script always brings small errors. Damage from light, heat, and reactive bits adds more. Early cells had simple fixes that cut out bad parts and patched the gaps. But a stronger way to keep scripts healthy is to mix them. Mixing lets a cell replace a broken part with a good version from a partner. It also creates new blends that may work better in a changing world. This mixing is sex in its broad sense. At the start, it was likely simple. Two cells touched, their skins partly fused, and some scripts swapped places. Or one cell took in a parcel from another and stitched a piece into its own book. Later, special steps evolved. A cell copied its scripts, shuffled them, and then split into halves that each held a mixed set. Two halves from different parents then fused to make a new full set. This is the core plan used by many complex cells today. Why pay the cost of sex? The gains are real. Mixing clears damage that builds up when only clones are made. It lets good sets of genes meet in one cell. It also speeds the search for good answers when the world changes, because many blends are tried at once. In simple ponds filled with rivals, parasites, and sudden shifts in heat or salt, The blends that could stand new stress were the ones that lasted. Sex also pairs well with the rise of predators and prey. When a new way to catch shows up, a new way to hide or run tends to follow. Mixing gives both sides more tries each round. At the same time, not all life chose this path. Many tiny cells still copy by simple split and trade only a few parts now and then. They do fine in stable niches. The story is not that one way replaced the other. It is that both ways found homes. But for the branch that would one day craft bodies with many kinds of cells, sex was key. It kept scripts clean enough to grow large. It made change fast enough to explore new shapes. It supported teams of cells that had to keep many parts in step while still allowing fresh ideas to enter the line. From simple swaps to careful shuffles, gene mixing turned the slow crawl of chance into a steady walk, and then into a pace that could match a world of rising oxygen, new food webs, and quick tests. For a very long time, life was only tiny cells. They fed, copied, and split. That alone can fill the sea with slim films and clouds of green. But in many places, cells began to stay together after they split. At first, this was only a loose clump, held by sticky coats. A clump can do small things a loner cannot. It is harder to swallow. It makes its own shade when the sun is harsh. It can hold water a little longer when the pool dries. If the cells in the clump make thin threads that tie them, the clump becomes more stable. If they make small pores between neighbors, food and signals can move from one to another. Signals are tiny chemical notes that say, grow, rest, turn, repair. Soon the group can act like a single thing with many parts. The simplest step is to divide chores. Cells on the outside face the world. They can make a tougher coat or carry small barbs to ward off grazers. Cells on the inside can focus on feeding and growth because they are protected. In some green groups in quiet ponds, round colonies formed where outside cells swam and inside cells saved energy. Over many steps, some colonies learned a key trick. When a parent colony grew, a few inner cells became small daughter balls and were released to start new colonies. That is a life cycle, a plan written in chemistry to make a body and then make new bodies. Sea mats also learned teamwork. They grew layers that channeled light in smart ways, so deeper cells got just enough and surface cells did not burn. Some mats sent narrow threads down into soft mud to tie the structure and bring up sulfide or iron for cells that used those feeds. Slime molds on land showed another path. When food was rich, they lived as single cells. When food ran out, they sent a signal that called neighbors. The crowd gathered and flowed as one body toward light and air. Some cells became a stalk. Some became spores. The stalk lifted the spores high so wind could carry them. This is a simple split into helper and seed, a small but clear step toward having set roles. In the sea, soft animals took shape when teamwork rose to a new level. Some cells learned to pull hard together as muscle. Others learned to carry fast signals as nerves. Some made tough fibers as simple bones. Some wrapped the whole with a skin that could heal. All this was possible because oxygen gave more energy, because gene mixing gave variety, and because small rules inside cells learned to tell each part when to grow and when to stop. The first bodies were simple, like sacs and tubes. But even a tube with a mouth at one end and a grip at the other can crawl, eat, and sense. Once bodies existed, nature could tune them like tools. Longer arms, faster nerves, stronger skins, better eyes, all grew from small steps written into how and when cells read their scripts. Teamwork began as a way to endure heat, dryness, and hungry mouths. It grew into a way to make shapes that could move, feel, and survive storms. From there, the path to forests and fish and earths was open. For ages, green life was stuck to wet places because its cells dried fast. The first step onto land was small. Thin films of tiny plants clung to damp rock near shore and in spray. They made simple coats that slowed drying. They grew low and flat to hug moisture and avoid wind. Fungi helped. Fungi can thread through rock and soil and fetch water and minerals. When they joined with green cells, the pair did better than either alone. The green partner made sugar with light. The fungal partner traded water and nutrients for some of that sugar. This quiet trade is still common in roots today. As time passed, land plants solved three hard problems. The first was water loss. Waxy skins and tiny valves that open and close kept water inside while still letting gases move for photosynthesis. The second was support. Water holds up soft bodies. Air does not. Plants wove long, tough fibers of cellulose and other polymers that stiffened their stems. These fibers let stems rise toward light. The third was transport. A tall plant must move water up from soil and move sugar from leaves down to roots and new buds. Plants built tiny pipes for both jobs. Water pipes pulled liquid upward as it evaporated from leaves. Sugar pipes flowed under gentle pressure from places that made sugar to places that used it. With skins, fibers, and pipes, small ground covers became knee-high bushes and then trees. Roots pushed deeper and cracked rock. As rock broke into grains, fresh soil formed. Soil held water between storms and gave footholds for seedlings. Litter from dead leaves and trunks fed the soil and made it hold even more water like a sponge. Insects, early landworms, and tiny soil dwellers moved in and began to mix the top layers. The land changed color from bare gray to green and brown and gold. Rivers learned new paths as roots held banks and forests slowed floods. The air changed too. Day after day, green leaves took in carbon dioxide and released oxygen. Ozone high in the air grew thicker and blocked harsh light, making the land safer. With shade and seeds came cool patches and steady moist places far from the sea. Seeds were a leap. A seed is a small package that carries a baby plant with food and a coat. It can wait out a bad year. It can ride the wind or a bird. It lets life spread to places where rain comes and goes. Later, flowers and fruit added more ways to move seeds by using animals as helpers. All of this began with simple algae at a shore, then small moss-like forms in wet places, then upright stems with pipes, and finally forests that made their own rich world above stone. Plants built land homes by turning light and air into wood and leaf and root. They made the stage for the next players to step out of the sea. As oxygen rose and food webs grew, animals tried many shapes. Some stayed simple, like sponges that pump water through their bodies to catch tiny food. Some became cups and bells with stinging cells to catch prey in the drift. Others learned to crawl and burrow, which churned soft sea floors and let oxygen reach deeper into mud. A key idea took hold in many lines. Put muscles in bands, put a mouth at one end, put a simple brain near the mouth to make quick choices, and run a nerve cord down the length of the body to talk to muscles. Add eyes or simple light spots at the front so the head knows what it is moving into. Add a gut with a mouth and an exit so food moves one way and can be processed in stages. Add a skin with tiny sensors and a coat of hard bits for protection. With that plan, bodies could swim, crawl, and hunt. They could also hide, dig, and filter. The rise in oxygen made this plan possible because muscle needs a lot of energy. With energy came speed. With speed came a race between teeth and armor. Hard parts began to fill the fossil record because teeth, spines, and shells last in stone. Some animals made outer armor of calcium or silica. Some made inner supports as cartilage and then bone. Jaws gave bite. Fins shaped flow. Jointed legs gave grip on soft ground and let bodies reach and hold. Eyes improved quickly because a small gain in sight brings a big gain in survival. Simple pits became cups, then lenses, then complex eyes. Genes that tell where to put parts and in what order, like which section becomes a head or a limb, learn to work in rows. A small change in when a switch flips could lengthen a limb or add a segment. This simple timing made many forms from a shared plan. In a short slice of deep time, seashells filled with trilobites that scuttled, worms that dug, early fish with armor plates, and strange forms with spines and frills that tried moves we no longer see. This busy time is often shown as a burst. It may have been many bursts in many seas, helped by rising oxygen, new food, better shells, and the way a new move by one line pushes many other lines to answer it. Once animals could chew plants and prey on each other, complexity grew because many roles opened. Grazers, filters, burrowers, hunters, scavengers, reef builders, and floaters all shared space. The sea became a set of floors and rooms, with sunlight zones above and dark quiet zones below, with edges where waves broke and safe lagoons inside reefs. Every niche had a body that fit it. All this began as small steps in gene control and in how cells stuck and talked. The result was a living library of shapes that set the base for fish, crabs, snails, corals, and the many lines that would later walk onto land. Life did not climb in the straight line. It moved, paused, and sometimes fell back. The planet had long freezes when ice reached low latitudes and seas were roofed with thin shells of ice. Under that lid, volcanoes kept adding carbon dioxide. Weathering slowed on a cold, dry land. Over time, the air gained enough greenhouse gas to warm the world again. When ice melted, fresh nutrients washed to sea, and blooms of tiny cells changed the water and fed new webs. Later, there were times of extreme heat when wide lava fields poured out gas for long spans. Warm air held more water. Rains grew hard. Rocks weathered fast and carried loads of dissolved material to the sea. The mix stressed old webs and set new ones. There were also sudden shocks. Now and then, space sent a large rock. One such strike ended the age of many big reptiles on land and in the sea. The sky darkened with dust for months. Fires burned. After the dark came cold, then rain full of acid, then a swing back to warmth as greenhouse gases rose. Many lines ended. In the quiet that followed, small mammals spread into gaps. They grew large, took to the air, returned to the sea, and shaped the world in new ways. Earlier, the worst die-off we know was linked to huge lava fields that erupted for a long time. The sea warmed, the deep lost oxygen, and many animals could not find a home. Reefs fell silent and took millions of years to return. Yet return they did. Life's rule is to try. When one path ends, another opens. Seeds hid through cold years and sprouted when warmth returned. Tiny cells lived in cracks during floods and built up again when waters fell. Fish found new rivers. Insects tried new flowers. Forests rose, fell, and rose again. The ground kept its quiet tasks through it all. Volcanoes breathed, rocks weathered, rivers carried grains, and the carbon loop kept turning. These crises were hard, but they did not end the story. They mixed the deck. They set the stage for new roles. They taught a basic truth. Life is not a ladder. It is a web that can tear and knit itself again. When we read old stones, we should see both loss and patience. We should see old reefs cut and later rebuilt. We should see dunes where seas once were and lakes where glaciers once lay. In each shift, Living things tested the new world and found ways to fit it, often with simple tools they already had used in new ways. That is the quiet courage of life on a changing world. We did not watch the first steps, but we can read them. Rocks are our library. Thin sections under a microscope show textures of old mats, crystals that grew in calm lakes, and grains that rolled in waves. Ratios of light and heavy atoms tell us when life was fixing carbon and when oxygen rose in air and sea. Iron layers the color of rust show the time when oxygen met a world full of bare iron and turned it to stone. Bubbles trapped in salt from old seas hold a sample of the air. Cores pulled from deep ice stack winter and summer layer by layer for long spans and hold tiny drops of old acid from distant blasts. Fossils show shells and bones, but also tracks, burrows, and nests that record behavior. Gene trees inside living cells let us trace lines back to common roots because scripts carry marks of their long past. In labs, simple jars with water, gases, light, and sparks make small building blocks. Warm rocks and clays help join them. Oily parts make bubbles without help. Short strands copy a bit of themselves on simple surfaces. Light tools that split water still carry an old core where RNA does the key step. Mitochondria keep their own tiny loop of script and sit behind two skins, a quiet sign of their past life as free cells. None of this proves one single path. It shows many possible routes that all pass through the same landmarks. This helps when we look outward. Mars holds old riverbeds and lake basins. Icy moons hide oceans under ice and have vents at the seafloor where rock and water meet. Worlds around other stars may carry seas, clouds, and air blankets like ours. If life needs water, energy, and the right elements, many places offer those. We look for simple signs first. Pigments that tint a world, gases in air that should not sit together unless something keeps making them. Mats or films that trap grains and build layers. No one sign is enough. Together they can tell a story, just as on Earth. The lesson is not that life is easy, but that the steps ask only for steady energy, time, and cycles that sort and sift. If such calm, patient places exist elsewhere, then tiny rooms may form there too. They may learn to copy, to keep a steady inside, to feed on light or rock, and to leave thin films and soft mounds that one day someone will read as we do. Our own story tells us what to seek and how to listen. It also tells us to be humble. We are late in the tale. The first writers were bubbles on warm stone, not us. We now carry their scripts in every cell. Let the whole path settle like dew on grass. A hot young world cooled in gathered seas. Simple parts formed in water, on rock, and in thin films that dried and re-wetted under a dim sun. Minerals helped small steps. Oily skins closed into tiny rooms that kept good parts near. Strands that could copy and fold grew from short random chains into tools and scripts. Energy moved first by chance flows at vents and shores, then by small packets made inside rooms with the help of gates and pumps. DNA took the long memory. Proteins took most work. RNA stayed as the reader and helper. Tiny cells learned to keep a steady inside in a jumpy world and to pass on their traits with fair faith. Light use began softly, then learned the hard trick of splitting water. Oxygen rose and changed sea, land, and sky. A big cell joined with a small partner that made energy well, and together they powered larger bodies. Inner rooms, scaffolds, and careful traffic appeared. Scripts mixed and kept clean through sex. Teams of cells took form, split chores, and made bodies that could move, sense, and heal. Green life climbed from wet edges to build forests with skins, pipes, and roots that cracked rock and made deep soil. animals tried eyes, teeth, shells, fins, legs, and plans. Crises came and went. Ice spread and melted. Lava poured and slowed. Stones fell from space. Yet life endured, learned, and filled new roles after each test. We read this tale in red iron bands, in rippled layers of ancient reefs, in tiny loops of script inside our own cells, and in the quiet power plants each of our cells still carries. It is not a tale of sudden leaps. It is a tale of small steps repeated in many places for a very long time. Water, rock, air, light, and time did the work. Life is the name we give to the set of tricks that keep a small room going, growing, and copying in such a world. When you look at a leaf, a shell, or your own hand, you see the end of many patient trials that began with a bubble on warm stone. If you are resting now, keep a simple picture. Under old stars, in a small pool, a thin film dried in the sun, and small parts crowded and joined. A wave came and lifted tiny rooms into the light. They grew, split, and kept what worked. The rest is our shared quiet history. Thank you for listening. Sleep well, and good night.